Why was she smiling? That's the question nobody thought to ask. Not at first. Not when Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison stepped into the Coronado Naval Special Warfare Command Center at exactly 14:30 hours, boots clicking against polished concrete like a countdown timer nobody else could hear. 57 monitors blinked with real-time intelligence from the Middle East. Tactical maps glowed red with danger zones. Encrypted chatter buzzed through communication channels, connecting active deployments across the entire world. And there she sat. Terminal 7, a station classified for senior intelligence analysts only. The kind of workstation that required clearance levels most people would never even know existed. Her neon blue hair spilled over her shoulders like an electric waterfall, completely out of regulation, impossible to ignore. Porcelain skin caught the blue light from multiple monitors, defined cheekbones creating shadows that made her look more like she belonged on a magazine cover than in a military command center. Gray contractor uniform, no rank insignia, just a badge that said Madison Cross. Morrison paused. 28 personnel in that room, SEALs, intelligence officers, communications specialists, all of them about to witness something, though none of them understood what. Well, well. His voice cut through the electronic hum like a blade through silk. Who exactly gave you access to that terminal, sweetheart? 28 heads turned, some curious, some already smirking because they knew what was coming or thought they did. Madison's fingers didn't pause on the keyboard, didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. Winter blue eyes stayed locked on screens showing classified satellite imagery, the kind of intelligence that could shift the balance of power in 3 different countries. Her hands moved with purpose, muscle memory that spoke of thousands of hours at similar stations, each keystroke deliberate, confident. The subtle way she positioned her fingers, the automatic spacing, these were details lost on the audience watching this unfold. But they would matter soon. I asked you a question, Princess. Morrison stepped closer, his 6'4" frame towering over her seated position, casting a shadow across her monitors. That's a restricted terminal. You look like you belong at Starbucks, not analyzing operational intelligence. The insult landed exactly as intended. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Validation, entertainment, the natural order of things being reinforced. Madison's fingers paused, just for a moment. Winter blue eyes lifted slowly, meeting him with an expression of complete calm. Not defiance, not anger, just calm. Terminal access was properly authenticated, sir. Morrison laughed. Loud, theatrical, designed for the audience. Sir, you think calling me sir makes this legitimate? Let me guess. Daddy got you this contract through political connections. He circled her terminal like a predator sizing up prey, each step deliberate, intimidating. The other personnel exchanged glances. Some smirked at what they assumed would be quick entertainment. Others shifted uncomfortably at the obvious mismatch. Because there's always that moment, isn't there? When you're watching something unfold and you know it's wrong but you don't know how to stop it, or maybe you just don't want to. Ma'am, perhaps I can help clarify the situation. Staff Sergeant Sofia Rodriguez approached from the communications bay, olive green uniform crisp, black hair pulled back in a regulation bun. At 27, Rodriguez had earned her position through relentless competition in a male-dominated field. She wore her authority like armor, and the presence of another woman in what she considered her domain. That triggered something. Competitive instincts honed through years of proving herself worthy of respect among elite warriors. Madison's response came without looking away from her screens. Authorization Protocol 77 Alpha was authenticated at 1300 hours through JC channels. The specificity gave Rodriguez pause. Protocol 77 Alpha wasn't common knowledge. It required clearance levels that most contractors never approached, but Rodriguez had built her career on never backing down from challenges, especially from civilians who threatened the established hierarchy. Morrison sensed his audience and decided to escalate. Listen here, Barbie. I don't care what paperwork you waved around. This is a SEAL command center, not some corporate office where you can bat your eyelashes and get whatever you want." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Several junior personnel shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that Morrison had crossed from professional questioning into personal attack territory. But others nodded approval. This was how they maintained standards, how they protected the integrity of their elite brotherhood. Madison finally turned in her chair, winter blue eyes meeting Morrison's gaze with unsettling steadiness. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, your concerns are noted. However, my presence here falls within authorized parameters for ongoing operations." The use of his rank and name without introduction sent a ripple through the watching crowd. How did she know his identity? Morrison felt the first flicker of uncertainty, but pushed it aside, doubling down on aggression to mask his confusion. Ongoing operations. Morrison's laugh carried less confidence than before. "Lady, the only operation you should be concerned with is finding the exit. This isn't a game, and classified intelligence isn't something you play with while getting your nails done." Petty Officer Williams, barely 24 and still new enough to question rather than simply follow, watched from his position near the communications array. Something about the woman's composure struck him as unusual. Not the nervous defensiveness of someone caught where they shouldn't be, but the calm confidence of someone who belonged exactly where they sat. Tech Sergeant Thompson emerged from the weapons systems bay, drawn by the commotion. At 31, Thompson had earned his position through encyclopedic knowledge of every piece of military hardware in the American arsenal. His expertise had saved lives in 3 different combat zones. "What's the situation here?" Morrison gestured dismissively toward Madison. "Just explaining to our visitor that classified systems aren't appropriate for civilian contractors with pretty blue hair." Thompson studied Madison's screens. The complexity of the satellite imagery analysis she had been conducting would challenge experienced intelligence officers, yet she navigated them with apparent ease. "Ma'am, those are some pretty sophisticated threat assessments you're running. Mind if I ask about your technical background?" Madison's fingers continued moving across the keyboard. "Military systems architecture, satellite intelligence interpretation, and tactical analysis protocols. Standard skill set for this assignment." Thompson frowned. The terminology she used was precise, not the vague generalizations typical of contractors trying to sound knowledgeable. She had referenced specific technical frameworks that weren't widely taught outside specialized military programs. "Standard skill set," Thompson repeated slowly. "And where exactly did you acquire expertise in military systems architecture?" "Various training programs over the past 8 years." Vague but not evasive. There's a difference. And Thompson, with his years of reading people across combat zones, recognized it. The tension was building. You could feel it in the air. That electric moment before lightning strikes, before everything changes. Morrison could feel control slipping, so he did what people do when they're losing ground. He got louder. "You know what? I don't care about your training programs. I care about protocol. And protocol says civilians don't sit at classified terminals without proper supervision." "Then perhaps," Madison said quietly, still not raising her voice, "you should verify my authorization before making assumptions." That word, assumptions, it landed differently than her previous responses, sharper, more pointed. Morrison's jaw tightened. "Are you suggesting I don't understand security protocols?" "I'm suggesting verification prevents misunderstandings." The room had gone completely silent now. Even the keyboard clicking had stopped. 28 people holding their breath, watching this collision course that nobody seemed able to stop. Rodriguez stepped forward. "Lieutenant Commander, perhaps we should confirm her credentials through proper channels." But Morrison was too far committed. Pride, ego, the audience watching, all of it pushing him forward even as warning bells started ringing in the back of his mind. "I'll tell you what proper channels look like, Sergeant." He reached for the phone on the wall. "I'm calling Commander Hayes. We'll get this sorted out right now." Madison said nothing, just returned her attention to the screens, fingers moving again across the keyboard, as if this confrontation was merely an interruption to her actual work. Morrison dialed, waited. His free hand tapped against the wall with impatience. "Commander Hayes, Morrison, we have a situation in the command center." He kept his eyes on Madison as he spoke. "There's a civilian contractor at Terminal 7, blue hair, claims to have authorization for classified systems. I think we need to—" He stopped, face changing, color draining slightly. "Sir, yes, sir, Terminal 7, yes, sir, she's here now." The tapping stopped. Morrison's posture shifted, subtle, but everyone noticed. "Understood, sir. Yes, sir, right away." He hung up, stood there for a moment, then turned to face the room. "Commander Hayes is on his way down." Relief flickered across some faces. Finally, someone with authority would sort this out, but Williams noticed something. Morrison's voice had changed. The swagger was gone, replaced by something else. Something that looked almost like concern. 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. The command center maintained its usual operations, but everyone's attention was divided. Monitors still displayed intelligence feeds. Keyboards still clicked. But 28 sets of eyes kept drifting toward Terminal 7, where Madison continued her work with the same calm focus she'd maintained throughout the entire confrontation. Rodriguez found herself studying the woman more carefully now, the way she navigated those systems, the comfort level with protocols that typically required years of specialized training. Something wasn't adding up. But what? Thompson moved closer, pretending to check communications equipment but actually watching Madison's screens. The satellite imagery she was analyzing covered multiple operational theaters. The threat assessments were sophisticated, military-grade analysis, and she was cross-referencing data streams in ways that suggested deep familiarity with intelligence architecture. Who was this woman? The door opened. Commander Hayes entered, 53 years old, 3 combat deployments, 27 years of service. The kind of officer who'd earned respect through competence, not intimidation. His presence immediately shifted the room's energy. But he wasn't alone. 3 more officers entered behind him. Captain Martinez, Operations Director, Colonel Chen, Strategic Intelligence, and bringing up the rear a civilian in a dark suit, NSA badge visible on his belt. This wasn't protocol for handling an unauthorized contractor. This was something else entirely. Hayes surveyed the room. His gaze moved from Morrison to Madison to the assembled personnel. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, report." Morrison straightened. "Sir, I discovered this civilian contractor at Terminal 7, a classified workstation. When questioned about her authorization, she provided vague responses. I believed verification through command was appropriate. Professional, measured, all the aggression from earlier carefully edited out, but Hayes had been in the military long enough to read between the lines. And did you verify her credentials before escalating to command?" Brief hesitation. "Sir, the situation appeared to warrant immediate command notification." "That's not what I asked." Morrison's jaw tightened. "No, sir. I did not complete standard verification procedures before calling you." Hayes nodded slowly, then turned to Madison. "Dr. Cross, I apologize for the interruption to your work." "Doctor." That single word rippled through the room like a shockwave. Rodriguez felt her stomach drop. Thompson's eyes widened. Williams looked confused, because civilian contractors don't get called doctor in military command centers. Not unless. Madison turned in her chair. "Commander Hayes, no apology necessary. though I believe there may be some confusion regarding my role here." "Indeed." Hayes glanced at Morrison. "Lieutenant Commander, are you familiar with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency's Psychological Evaluation Program for Special Operations Personnel?" "Yes, sir. DARPA's Psych Eval program screens candidates for elite assignments." "And are you aware that DARPA occasionally conducts field evaluations to assess how personnel respond to unexpected situations and challenges to established hierarchies?" The color drained from Morrison's face, complete understanding dawning, horror, embarrassment, the realization that he hadn't stumbled into a security breach. He'd walked straight into a test and failed spectacularly. "Sir, Hayes held up a hand. "Dr. Cross has been conducting a comprehensive psychological evaluation of this command center for the past 3 weeks. Her presence here today was specifically designed to assess how senior personnel respond when confronted with individuals who don't fit expected appearance patterns but possess appropriate credentials." 3 weeks. Madison had been there for 3 weeks, watching, evaluating, and Morrison had just performed exactly as designed, showing every bias, every assumption, every flaw in his leadership approach for official record. Captain Martinez stepped forward. "Dr. Cross holds a Ph.D. in military psychology from Stanford, 8 years with DARPA's Special Operations Personnel Assessment Division. Security clearance level exceeds everyone in this room, including myself. Her presence at Terminal 7 was not only authorized, it was orchestrated." The silence was crushing now. 28 people realizing they'd just participated in an evaluation, and most of them had failed. But here's what they didn't know yet, what was about to make this so much worse. Madison hadn't just been evaluating Morrison. She'd been watching everyone, every reaction, every choice, every moment of silence when they could have spoken up, every smirk when they should have questioned, every assumption when they should have verified. Colonel Chen opened a tablet. "Dr. Cross's preliminary findings will be integrated into personnel records and considered for future assignment selections. Her evaluation methodology has been approved at the Pentagon level for implementation across all Special Operations commands." Rodriguez felt sick. Her competitive instinct to challenge another woman in her domain, her territorial marking instead of professional courtesy, all of it documented, analyzed, recorded. Thompson thought about every time he doubted civilian contractors based on appearance rather than demonstrated competence. How many times had his technical expertise been overshadowed by the same biases he just watched Morrison display? Williams wondered if his silence was any better than Morrison's aggression. He'd noticed something was off, felt uncomfortable with the confrontation, but he hadn't spoken up, hadn't questioned, hadn't done anything except watch. And what about the others? The ones who'd smirked, chuckled, nodded approval at Morrison's insults. They were all part of this now, all documented, all evaluated. Madison stood. For the first time since Morrison entered the room, she moved away from Terminal 7. She was shorter than most people expected, maybe 5'6". The neon blue hair that had drawn so much ridicule fell past her shoulders in waves that caught the fluorescent light. But it was her eyes that held the room. Winter blue, sharp, missing nothing. "Commander Hayes, my evaluation period has concluded. I'll have preliminary findings to your office by 800 tomorrow." "Understood, Dr. Cross. Thank you for your work." She gathered her materials, a small leather bag, a tablet, nothing else. No theatrical exit, no dramatic confrontation, no calling out Morrison directly for his behavior. She didn't need to. The situation spoke for itself. But as she walked toward the door, she paused, just for a moment, turned back to face Morrison. "Lieutenant Commander, your tactical competence is well documented. 3 successful deployments, multiple commendations. You've saved lives and served with distinction." Her voice was quiet, professional, but each word landed with weight. But leadership isn't about domination. It's about judgment, and judgment requires looking past surfaces to see what actually matters. Then she left, the NSA official following. Colonel Chen, Captain Martinez. Hayes remained, standing in the center of a command center that suddenly felt much smaller than before. Lieutenant Commander Morrison. Hayes's voice was steady, controlled. My office now. Morrison followed, leaving 27 personnel in various states of shock, confusion, and self-reflection. Rodriguez sank into a chair near the communications bay. Her hands were shaking slightly. 8 years of proving herself, building her reputation, earning respect in a field that didn't hand it out easily. And in one interaction, she'd revealed the same biases she'd fought against her entire career. The same competitive instinct that made her territorial with another woman instead of professional, instead of supportive. Had she become the thing she'd been fighting? Thompson returned to his station but couldn't focus. His encyclopedic knowledge of military hardware, his technical expertise, his years of experience, none of it had prevented him from making the same snap judgment Morrison had. Pretty blue hair equals incompetent civilian. Gray contractor uniform equals lower clearance. Appearance equals capability. When had he started thinking like that? Williams stared at his communications array. He'd felt uncomfortable, noticed something was wrong, but done nothing. Was that better or worse than active participation? He didn't know, but the question haunted him. The rest of the personnel slowly returned to their duties, but the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted, because they'd all just learned something uncomfortable about themselves, about their assumptions, about their judgment, about the gap between who they thought they were and who they actually revealed themselves to be when tested. And Madison, she was already in a secure conference room 3 floors up beginning her preliminary analysis. 28 personnel, 28 different responses, some predictable, some surprising, all revealing. But there was one thing none of them knew yet. One detail that would emerge in the coming days that would make this situation even more complex, even more uncomfortable. Madison's evaluation wasn't just about assessing individual responses. It was about identifying systemic patterns in how elite military units responded to challenges to established hierarchies, how they treated outsiders who didn't fit expected patterns, how they balanced security concerns against professional courtesy, how they maintained standards without defaulting to assumptions based on appearance. And the results were going to reshape special operations, training throughout the entire Pacific Theater. Because what happened in that command center wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, one that existed in facilities across every branch of service, one that impacted operational effectiveness, team cohesion, and the military's ability to adapt to evolving security challenges that required diverse perspectives and unconventional approaches. The sun was setting over Coronado as Morrison sat across from Commander Hayes. The office was sparse. A few commendations on the wall, family photos on the desk. The view looked out over the Pacific Ocean, waves catching the orange light of dusk. "Do you understand what just happened, Lieutenant Commander?" Morrison's voice was hoarse. "I made assumptions based on appearance, challenged someone without verification, escalated a situation that didn't require escalation." "That's the tactical assessment. What about the strategic one?" Silence. Hayes leaned forward. "You've served with distinction, led teams through combat zones, made split-second decisions that saved lives. But today, you revealed a fundamental flaw in your judgment. You assumed competence based on how someone looked. You used intimidation where verification would have been appropriate. And you did it in front of 27 personnel who now have a documented example of how not to lead." Each word landed like a hammer blow. "The irony," Hayes continued, "is that Dr. Cross's clearance level is higher than mine. Her expertise in psychological evaluation has influenced Pentagon policy. Her work has improved operational effectiveness across multiple theaters, and you treated her like an incompetent civilian because she had blue hair and didn't fit your mental image of what an analyst should look like. Morrison wanted to defend himself, to explain, to contextualize, but there was nothing to say. The facts were the facts. "Here's what happens next," Hayes said. "You will undergo remedial training in cultural competence and bias recognition. You will participate in Dr. Cross's follow-up evaluation sessions, and you will personally apologize to her for your conduct, not because it's required by regulation, but because it's the right thing to do." "Yes, sir." Beyond that, this incident will be documented in your personnel file. It won't end your career, but it will influence future assignment considerations, particularly for positions requiring cultural sensitivity and diplomatic engagement. Morrison nodded, the weight of it settling over him like concrete. "You're dismissed." He stood, saluted, turned toward the door. "Lieutenant Commander." He stopped. "Everyone has biases. The question is whether we recognize them and work to overcome them, or whether we let them dictate our judgment. Today was a hard lesson. Make sure you learn from it." "Yes, sir." Morrison left, walking through corridors he'd walked 1,000 times before, but everything felt different now, because he was different, or at least he understood himself differently. The gap between who he thought he was and who he'd actually revealed himself to be was impossible to ignore. And it was that gap that would keep him awake for many nights to come. What does real change actually look like? Not the dramatic transformations you see in movies, not the sudden revelations where everything shifts in a single moment. Real change is uncomfortable, slow, full of resistance and backsliding and moments where you wonder if it's even worth the effort. Morrison found that out over the next 6 months. The remedial training wasn't difficult academically. Cultural competence modules, bias recognition exercises, case studies in leadership failures driven by assumptions. He could pass the tests, answer the questions correctly, demonstrate understanding of the concepts. But understanding isn't the same as changing. 3 months after the evaluation, Morrison was observing a training exercise when a new contractor arrived. Young woman, tattoos visible on both arms, facial piercings, bright purple hair, and his first instinct, that immediate gut reaction, was to question her credentials, to assume she didn't belong, to doubt her competence based on appearance. He caught himself, stopped, thought about why his mind went there first, what assumptions he was making, what evidence he actually had. Then he introduced himself professionally and asked about her background. Turned out she had a master's degree in cybersecurity and had helped develop defensive protocols currently used by 3 different government agencies. Small moment, but it mattered. Rodriguez struggled in different ways. Her competitive instinct with other women didn't disappear because she recognized it. If anything, awareness made it more frustrating. She'd spent years fighting to be taken seriously in a male-dominated field, building walls, defending territory, not showing weakness. And now she was supposed to just stop, support other women instead of seeing them as competition, trust that there was room for multiple women to succeed without it diminishing her own accomplishments. Intellectually, she understood. Emotionally, it was harder. She started small, mentoring a junior female analyst who joined the team, deliberately offering support instead of scrutiny, sharing resources instead of hoarding them, asking questions instead of making assumptions. It felt unnatural at first, like wearing shoes on the wrong feet, but gradually something shifted. The wall she'd built to protect herself was also isolating her, keeping her from building the kinds of professional relationships that actually made her stronger. Thompson's journey was perhaps the most surprising, because he'd prided himself on being the technical expert, the guy who knew more about military hardware than anyone else in the room, and that expertise had become his identity, his value, his worth. But Dr. Cross's evaluation made him realize something uncomfortable. His technical knowledge wasn't enough, because technical problems don't exist in isolation. They exist in social contexts, political environments, cultural frameworks, and his inability to recognize competence when it came packaged differently than he expected was a technical limitation as much as a social one. He started reading differently, not just technical manuals and equipment specifications, but case studies in diverse problem solving, research on how different cultural approaches led to innovative solutions, studies on how homogeneous teams missed critical insights that diverse teams identified. The hardware didn't change, but his understanding of how humans interacted with that hardware expanded dramatically. Williams made the most interesting choice. He requested a transfer to a unit that specifically worked on cultural liaison operations, because he'd realized something during that confrontation in the command center. His discomfort with Morrison's behavior wasn't enough. Feeling like something was wrong wasn't the same as doing something about it. And he wanted to be the kind of person who did something. The transfer meant giving up a comfortable position, learning new skills, working with people from cultures he didn't understand, making mistakes, looking foolish, starting over in many ways. But it felt right, like moving towards something instead of just away from something. Not everyone changed. Some of the personnel who'd smirked and chuckled during Morrison's confrontation with Madison, they saw the whole thing as political correctness run amok, social engineering, the military getting soft. They completed the required training, said the right things, passed the evaluations. But they didn't actually change, just learned to hide their biases better. And that was a problem Dr. Cross's follow-up evaluation would have to address, because surface compliance isn't the same as genuine transformation, and the military's effectiveness depended on the latter, not the former. 6 months after the initial evaluation, Madison returned to Coronado, not undercover this time, not conducting a covert assessment. This was an official follow-up, documented, scheduled. Everyone knew she was coming. The atmosphere was completely different. Morrison greeted her professionally, respectfully, without presumption or condescension. They had a private meeting in Commander Hayes's office where he delivered his formal apology, not a performative apology designed for witnesses, a genuine acknowledgement of harm caused and lessons learned. Dr. Cross, my behavior was unprofessional and disrespectful. I made assumptions based on appearance and used my position to intimidate rather than verify. You were conducting important work, and I disrupted it because of my own biases and need to maintain social dominance. I'm sorry. Madison listened, really listened, then responded with the same directness she'd shown 6 months earlier. Lieutenant Commander, I accept your apology, but more importantly, I've reviewed your progress reports. The work you've done isn't easy. Confronting your own biases, changing ingrained patterns, actively choosing different responses. That requires courage, real courage. Not the kind that happens in combat, but the kind that happens in mundane moments when nobody's watching, and it would be easier to default to old patterns. Morrison felt something release in his chest, not absolution, but acknowledgement, recognition that the work mattered, that it was hard, that it was worth doing. Rodriguez met with Madison over coffee, away from the command center, neutral ground. They talked for 2 hours about competition, territory, the cost of always being on guard, the exhaustion of constantly proving yourself, the loneliness of not trusting other women to be allies instead of threats. I spent years thinking I had to be harder than the men around me, Rodriguez said, more aggressive, more territorial, because showing any softness would be seen as weakness. Madison nodded, and now? Now I'm realizing that wasn't strength. It was fear. Fear that there wasn't room for me unless I claimed it through force. But real strength is building something bigger than yourself, creating space for others instead of hoarding it. That's a profound shift. It's also terrifying, Rodriguez admitted. Because what if I'm wrong? What if being supportive instead of competitive makes me less valuable? Has it? Rodriguez thought about the junior analyst she'd been mentoring, the collaborative project with 3 other female officers from different branches, the network she was building instead of the walls. No, she said quietly, it's made me more valuable, just in ways I wasn't measuring before. Thompson's technical assessment had evolved significantly. Madison reviewed his recent work and found something surprising. His analysis of allied equipment integration didn't just focus on technical specifications anymore. It considered cultural approaches to problem solving, different nations' technological philosophies, how diverse engineering perspectives led to innovative solutions that wouldn't emerge from homogeneous teams. You've expanded your framework, Madison observed. Thompson smiled. Turns out technical expertise without cultural competence is like having half an equation. You can't solve the problem if you're missing critical variables. And what are those variables? Human factors, cultural context, different approaches to the same challenges, the recognition that the best solution isn't always the most familiar one. Williams had thrived in his new assignment. Cultural liaison work suited him. The discomfort with confrontation that had made him hesitant to challenge Morrison, that translated to sensitivity in cross-cultural communication, an ability to notice when something was wrong without immediately escalating, space for understanding before judgment. He'd made mistakes, plenty of them, misread cultural cues, said the wrong thing, approached situations with assumptions that turned out to be incorrect, but he was learning, growing, becoming more effective in ways that his previous assignment wouldn't have allowed. Do you ever regret the transfer? Madison asked during their meeting. Every day, Williams said honestly, then smiled. And I wouldn't go back for anything. Being uncomfortable means I'm growing, and growth is more important than comfort. The follow-up evaluation lasted 3 weeks. Madison conducted individual assessments, team observations, scenario-based exercises designed to test whether the changes were genuine or performative. She analyzed response patterns, decision-making processes, how personnel interacted with individuals who didn't fit expected patterns. And what she found was complex. Some personnel had genuinely transformed, changed their thinking, confronted biases, developed new capabilities. They would be more effective leaders, better teammates, more adaptable to the evolving security environment. Others had learned to hide their biases better, figured out the right answers, performed compliance without genuine change. They would continue to struggle with situations that required cultural competence, psychological insight, and the ability to recognize capability in unexpected packages. And that was the challenge, because the military couldn't afford to lose personnel who were technically competent but culturally limited. But it also couldn't afford to promote them into positions where their limitations would compromise operational effectiveness. The solution wasn't simple, but Madison's recommendations were clear. Ongoing assessment, continuous development, clear consequences for repeated pattern failures, and promotion criteria that valued cultural competence as much as tactical expertise. 1 year after the initial evaluation, the changes were visible throughout the command center. Not perfect, not complete, but real. Terminal 7 was occupied by a contractor with green hair and multiple visible tattoos. Nobody questioned his credentials, because they verified first, then engaged professionally. His expertise in cryptographic analysis exceeded most career intelligence officers, and his unconventional background brought perspectives that identified patterns others missed. A new female analyst joined Rodriguez's team. Instead of competition, Rodriguez offered mentorship, resources, support, and watched as the analyst's confidence grew, her contributions expanded, and the entire team became more effective. Thompson collaborated with allied nations on equipment integration in ways that valued different technological approaches. The resulting innovations wouldn't have emerged from American-only teams, and his willingness to learn from diverse perspectives made him invaluable in international operations. Williams served as cultural liaison for a sensitive operation involving coordination with 12 different nations. His integrity, sensitivity, and ability to navigate complex cultural dynamics made the mission possible. Morrison led a team through a challenging deployment. When a civilian contractor with pink hair and facial piercings joined his team as a communications specialist, his first instinct was still to question. But he caught himself, verified credentials, engaged professionally, discovered she had expertise that proved critical to mission success. Small moments, but they mattered. Because change doesn't happen in dramatic revelations. It happens in mundane choices, when you're tired, when nobody's watching, when it would be easier to default to old patterns but you choose differently anyway. That's where real transformation lives. 3 years after Madison's evaluation, Commander Hayes was promoted to Pacific Fleet Operations. Morrison took over as Command Center Director. Rodriguez led the International Military Gender Integration Program. Thompson directed Allied Technology Integration. Williams served as Senior Cultural Advisor for Pacific Theater Operations. All of them influenced by that single evaluation. That uncomfortable confrontation that revealed who they actually were versus who they thought they were. That gap between intention and action, between belief and behavior. And all of them carrying forward the lessons learned, not perfectly, not without continued struggle, but genuinely, authentically, in ways that made them more effective, their teams stronger, and the military better equipped to handle the complex challenges of an evolving security environment. Madison's work expanded throughout the Pacific Theater. Her evaluation methodology was adopted across multiple branches. Thousands of personnel underwent similar assessments. Not everyone changed, but enough did to shift the culture, to create environments where competence was valued over conformity, where diverse perspectives were seen as assets rather than threats, where leadership meant serving others rather than dominating them. 5 years after that day in the command center, Madison was conducting an evaluation in Singapore. Different location, different personnel, same underlying challenge. How do people respond when confronted with capability that doesn't match their expectations? She set up at a classified terminal wearing bright red hair this time, gray contractor uniform, no rank insignia, waiting to see what would happen. A junior officer approached, young, confident, ready to question the civilian contractor at the sensitive workstation. Then he paused, stopped, checked the verification protocols before engaging, confirmed her credentials, then introduced himself professionally and asked if she needed any support with her work. Small moment, but Madison smiled. Because that junior officer had been trained by someone who'd learned from someone who'd been affected by her original evaluation. The ripple effect of change spreading outward in ways that couldn't be immediately measured, but were fundamentally transforming military culture. Not everywhere, not all at once, but steadily, genuinely, in ways that mattered. The command center in Coronado operated differently now, not because of dramatic policy changes or sweeping reforms, but because individuals had chosen to confront their own assumptions, to change their response patterns, to value competence over appearance, to lead through service rather than domination. And those individual choices, multiplied across thousands of personnel, over years of continued effort, created systemic change that improved operational effectiveness, enhanced international cooperation, and prepared the military for security challenges that required adaptability, cultural competence, and the ability to recognize capability in all its diverse forms. Morrison stood in front of the command center one evening, watching the sun set over the Pacific. 5 years of growth, mistakes, learning, changing. It hadn't been easy. There were moments when he'd backslid, times when his old patterns resurfaced, situations where he caught himself making assumptions and had to actively choose differently. But he was different now, better, more effective, not because he'd become someone else, but because he'd become a more complete version of himself, one that valued judgment over presumption, evidence over assumption, character over appearance. Rodriguez received a message from the junior analyst she'd mentored years earlier, now serving in a leadership position in another command, thanking Rodriguez for the support that had made her career possible, for choosing collaboration over competition, for showing that strength could mean building others up rather than defending territory. The message made Rodriguez cry, not from sadness, but from the recognition that the hardest changes she'd made, the most uncomfortable growth, had created something meaningful, something that would continue rippling outward long after she retired. Thompson presented innovations at an international defense technology conference, ideas that emerged from collaboration with engineers from 12 different nations, solutions that wouldn't have been possible without valuing diverse approaches, without recognizing that his expertise was strengthened, not threatened, by perspectives different from his own. Williams coordinated a sensitive cultural liaison operation that prevented a diplomatic incident that could have destabilized an entire region. His success came directly from the sensitivity he developed, the ability to navigate complex cultural dynamics, the willingness to ask questions instead of making assumptions. None of them were perfect. They still made mistakes, still struggled with ingrained biases, still had moments where their first instinct was the wrong one. But they'd learned to catch themselves, to question, to verify, to choose better responses even when it was uncomfortable, especially when it was uncomfortable. Because that's what genuine change looks like. And Madison, she continued her work, evaluating, assessing, identifying patterns, recommending changes, training the next generation of special operations personnel to value competence over conformity, to see diversity as strength, to recognize that the most dangerous assumptions are the ones you don't realize you're making. 10 years after that first evaluation, the Pacific Theater Special Operations Command published a comprehensive study. It documented improved effectiveness achieved through comprehensive psychological assessment programs, better personnel selection, enhanced cultural competence, increased operational success rates. The study credited Madison's evaluation methodology with fundamental improvements across every measured metric, and recommended mandatory psychological resilience assessment for all candidates seeking elite operational positions. But the numbers, while impressive, didn't capture the real story, the actual transformation, because you can't measure in statistics what it means when someone chooses to question their own assumptions, when they value another person's competence over their own comfort, when they lead through service rather than domination. You can't quantify the moment when Rodriguez chose to mentor instead of compete, when Thompson valued diverse perspectives over technical orthodoxy, when Williams transferred to a challenging assignment because growth mattered more than comfort, when Morrison caught himself making assumptions and chose differently. Those moments don't show up in operational success metrics, but they're where real change lives. The sun set over Coronado Naval Special Warfare Command Center on the 10th anniversary of Madison's evaluation. The facility operated with enhanced understanding that professional competence required continuous assessment, that cultural awareness demanded ongoing development, that effective leadership served others rather than dominating them. Personnel who had participated in Madison's original evaluation now served throughout the Pacific Theater in positions of increased responsibility, carrying forward lessons about character, judgment, and professional competence that would influence military effectiveness for decades to come. Madison's evaluation had concluded years earlier, but its continuing influence on military culture, personnel development, and international cooperation demonstrated something fundamental, something that couldn't be taught in training modules or assessed through standardized tests. Real change begins with individual recognition that assumptions could be wrong, that initial impressions might mislead, that true strength is demonstrated through professional competence rather than intimidation of those who appear different. And the legacy continued, growing, expanding, influencing future generations of special operations personnel who would be prepared for complex challenges of international cooperation, cultural competence, and psychological resilience required for the evolving security environment. Not because of dramatic reforms or sweeping policy changes, but because individuals chose, in mundane moments when it would be easier to default to comfortable patterns, to do the harder thing, the right thing, the thing that required confronting their own limitations and growing beyond them. That's where transformation lives, not in grand gestures or perfect performances, but in small, uncomfortable, daily choices to be better than you were yesterday, to value others' dignity as much as your own authority, to recognize that real leadership isn't about being the strongest voice in the room. It's about creating space for all the voices that need to be heard. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, and in those actions, quiet and persistent and genuine, the world changes, not all at once, not perfectly, but truly, authentically, in ways that matter long after the initial confrontation fades from memory. That gray contractor uniform was never just a uniform. That neon blue hair was never just a fashion choice. They were a mirror, reflecting back what people chose to see, what they assumed, what they valued, what they feared. And in that reflection, some people saw themselves clearly for the first time. Uncomfortable, imperfect, flawed, but capable of change, worthy of growth, strong enough to choose better responses even when it meant admitting they'd been wrong. That's the story nobody tells about real transformation. It's not dramatic. It's not comfortable. It's not a single moment of revelation that changes everything instantly. It's choosing differently, again and again and again, until the new choice becomes natural, until the better response becomes instinct, until you've become someone who values competence over appearance, character over conformity, service over domination. And that choice, made by enough individuals, over enough time, in enough mundane moments when nobody's watching, and it would be easier to stay the same. That changes everything.